Welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja. And today I'll briefly talk about part one of Sound and the Fury. If you have already watched my introduction to the novel, I had sort of promised that I'll cover each narrative section. There are 4 narrative sections in separate conversations. So today I'll be talking about part one of the novel, which is from the beginning of the novel up to page 75 in my edition of the corrected text of the novel. Now, this section can also be called Benjy section because we are in the narrative and we see and experience the world from the point of view of Benjy Compson. Now, as I had mentioned in my previous conversation, Benjy is intellectually challenged. He cannot speak, and he experiences the world through his senses, through his auditory senses, through vision, through touch, through smell. So in a way, it's a really experimental part of the novel because what Faulkner is experimenting with is in terms of representing the feelings and thoughts of someone who technically cannot speak and who is considered not fully capable of reason and logic by people around him. So while you read this section, here are certain tips to reading it. This section has 3 temporalities in it, 3 divisions of time. We start the section in the present. That is Benjy's 33rd birthday. Then as we are reading it, we are privy to Benjy's own flashbacks, which are given in italics. And then we have references to Benjy's childhood and his teenage years. There is no linearity to this narrative. So you have to be extra careful as you read it. You have to constantly remind yourself as to where you are, what part of Benjy's life you are in. Now, originally it is said that when Faulkner wanted to publish it, he wanted each part of the narrative in a different color, which, of course, his publishers at that time told him was not possible. There is a special edition of the novel where the publishers did use different colors, but I have no access to it. So what I've advised my students to do is to mark on every page, kind of either with a marker if the book is their own, or at least draw lines where they can tell themselves as to what part of the novel they are in. I mean, these are my own notes on it, so you can clearly see that I am also marking as I read. Now, another tip in trying to figure out where you are in Benjy's story is to remember who is taking care of him. Now, Benjy has caretakers throughout the narrative, right? So if Versh is referred to or mentioned as his caretaker, we are in Benjy's childhood. Okay. If Luster is taking care of him, then we are in the present. And if his caretaker is TP, then we are in his teenage years. Now, what are the themes that emerge in this part of the novel? Let's take a look at those. So first of all, it's important to keep in mind that time is a generic theme in this part of the novel, and time as non-linear, right? Time as out of joint, as not moving in a linear fashion. And we immediately know that because Benjy keeps shifting from the present to the past to his teenage years. which kind of also maybe is trying to represent how his mind works, right? One aspect of not being able to function as the world expects us is to not being able to find a linear way of thinking and acting. So, time. Here, time is disjointed and it doesn't move in the linear fashion. Then, another important theme in the story or in this part is Benjy's relationship with Caddy, his sister. Now, Caddy is the only one, as it comes across to us, who actually cared about Benjy, and Benjy loves Caddy, right? And that is an important part of this novel. And then, of course, it's how Benjy describes or experiences things, right? Sometimes the sentences are really interesting because his view is metonymic. He sees a part, the hand moved away, the darkness came in, right? And that's his way of interpreting the world and thinking about the world. So, in terms of plot, if we could decipher it, in the beginning of the story, Benjy and Luster are walking along the fence, right? And across the fence is a golf course. This used to be the family land, which was eventually sold, and people actually come and play golf there. But Benjy doesn't understand that. He doesn't know the difference of property ownership and all, right? So we start there. Then there are childhood memories of the kids, the three brothers, Benjy, Jason, and Quentin, and the sister Caddy, playing in the branch in the stream close by, getting in trouble, right? And a lot of snippets of Caddy's relationship with Benjy, how lovingly she talks to him. She's the only one who understands him. And Benjy remembering the childhood memories of Caddy, right? But also as Caddy grows up and leaves, all of that is part of Benjy's memory. And his associations with the name Caddy are so strong that when in the golf course the golfers call for their caddy, it immediately sends him into a thought process about Caddy, his sister. Another important reference within the novel is, of course, Benjy's sterilization, right? His chemical castration. And that happens after an incident when he gets out of the gate and chases these young female school students, of course, which poses him as a threat to children, and he is sterilized. Now, this policy of sterilizing what legally people were considered at that time, and the term that was used legally was feeble-minded, or people who were a threat to society, it was followed in pretty much all states of United States, right? And it was part of the eugenics movement, the movement that somehow wanted to maintain a certain purity of race or humanity, whatever you want to call it. There are references in this part of the novel to sending Benjy to Jackson, kind of mentioned as a threat. Now, that is that Benjy might be institutionalized by the state. So, Jackson is where probably the facility is for intellectually challenged adults and children. We also get to know here in this part of the novel about the parents. Mother, who is a hypochondriac, right? She is always ill, right, or sick. She doesn't have much love for Benjy. She thinks that Benjy is a kind of a punishment for her. And then the relationship between the children and Dilsey, who is the matriarch of the servants and who basically takes care of all the children. We also have some foreshadowing about the characters of the two brothers. What comes across to us is that Quentin isn't much about him, but that he's reflective. Jason likes to be alone, right? And he is the one who tells on his brother and sister. He's the one who chops up all the dolls that Caddy had made for Benji, paper dolls, right? So there is a sort of foreshadowing that maybe he is also not somewhat right in his head. Maybe there is something wrong with him too. Overall, in this section, what we get then is Benji's life in the present and his experience and how Luster takes care of him, guides him through, and how Benji thinks about the world. We get flashbacks into his childhood with his brothers and sisters, but especially about Caddy, and we get flashbacks to his teenage years. Within this narrative is also the mention of Uncle Maury, who is their mother's relative and lives with them, parents, mom, and then an errand that Uncle Maury sends Benji and Caddy, and that is delivering a letter to Mrs. Patterson, who's a neighbor. We don't know what's in the letter, but they both do that. And that's when Benji stays on this side of the fence and Caddy jumps over and goes there. But by and large, what we get then is also the relationship of the children with each other, with their parents, and the role that the servants, and especially Dulcie, plays in keeping the household together. One thing that becomes really clear in this section is that none of these children are having a normal childhood, and the ramifications of it would be on their future life. So by the time we get to the end of the Benji section, we are in the past when Benji is a child, right? And their father is putting them to bed. Now, within this part of the novel, we also learn that Benji's original name used to be Maury, and it was changed to Benjamin. And according to Caddy, the reason was because it's a biblical name. But probably the reason, unstated though, is that maybe there was a belief that if a child is special, if you change their name, maybe it will change their destiny or change their state of mind as well. But we don't know the exact reason why his name was changed, but his mother likes the new name, Benjamin, right? So these are some of the details we get in this part of the novel. So let me kind of explain again the best way of reading this part, and that is make notes, mark on the pages, right, where you are. Are you in the present? Are you in Benji's flashbacks? If it's a flashback, it will be in italics. Then you have to figure out, if you're in the past, which past are you in? Is it his childhood or his teenage years? Also, sometimes you could be in the past and you read a few paragraphs, then there is a flashback or something else, or you're in the present, but then the story continues. You can see that bottom of page 9, the story ends and we have some other details, but then on page 13, the same narrative continues. Children playing and jumping into the pond, other part of the story, and then what do they do, like as they approach the house and their clothes are wet. So you'll have to do a really careful reading in order to really get at what's going on in this section. Okay, so overall, this is a pretty inconclusive rendering of part 1 of the novel, and that probably teaches us how perplexing this part is and can be. As always, my recommendation is read as carefully as you can, take notes, mark the text, especially to figure out where you are at any given time in the story, and maybe that would help. So that's all I have about part one of the novel. I don't find it to be a very conclusive explanation of it, but I hope you can find something useful in this. But do read the novel, and as I said, be extra careful as you read different parts of this section and take notes and highlight the text, and maybe then you'll be able to, work your way through it. That's all I have. I'll be back with more. Thank you so much. And if you would like, just take a look at the playlist that comes after this. And there are quite a few lectures on post-colonial novels and others in that playlist. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.